Howdy, freelancers. So today my voice is really scratchy. Been pretty much under the weather, which really sucks. But gonna just push through it. So hopefully my voice holds up for these few minutes. The question comes to you today by way of Cora, actually, and they asked me how do I prevent and manage scope creep in my projects? So for me, scope creep is something that, well, for one, I learned a really hard lesson early on in my career about, where I just basically wanted to please the client and kept on doing all of the things that they were asking me to do, which ultimately, well, squashed any profitability in the project. And it prolonged the project 2 months past where it should have been delivered on. So it's a difficult lesson to learn, especially if you go through with it. So I think that's why, you know, I think this is why I was asked this question, because scope creep is something that you're going to encounter time and time again. So first, let me define what it is. And it's really work requests that happen during the course of a project that weren't accounted for in the original scope of work. Now, I don't look at scope creep now as being something that's a bad thing. It's more of an opportunity, really. Now, don't get me wrong, scope creep can be, when handled wrong, right? It could kill everything about a project, the deadline, the profitability, the trust in that you built in the relationship with the client. So it's very important that scope creep is handled in the best way possible. Now, remember, scope creep starts with a simple ask. Usually it's just the client asking if something can be done. This ask usually comes on the heels of a client seeing something, live for the very first time, and they think of something that, they didn't expect initially, or they think of something what could be beneficial longer term down the road for their business and their website. So the first thing you want to do is first remember that they are asking a question, right? If you don't ask, you don't get. So don't immediately jump on it to get it done, but don't immediately dismiss it either. Take note of it, write it down someplace even. Second thing you want to do is evaluate this request. Here are 5 things to think about while you're doing this evaluation. First, is it simple? Is it quick to implement relative to the entire scope of the project? 2, is it something that needs a little bit more explanation or exploration, right? Do you need to research it a little bit more? 3, does it keep the project moving forward towards the goals that you and your client set out to do and accomplish with this project? Number 4, is it something that impacts the timeline? Does it mean that the deadline needs to be extended out further? And finally, 5, does it impact the cost of the project? Right? Notice I said the cost and not necessarily profits. All of these questions should be running through your head at this point, right? The answers to these questions should give you a better insight into the request that's just entered this project. When responding to this request, it's usually best to do it over the phone because, tone and intonation can't be exhibited through an email. But if you have to do it through email, that's fine too. But if these answers lean more towards further consultation, definitely best to do it over the phone. Which leads me to the final thing you want to do, and that's discuss your evaluation with the client, right? If this is something that doesn't affect the deadline, is fairly quick to implement, and this is really your judgment here, right? Like if the project is a week long and it takes a full day, that's a big portion of the project, right? If it's a 3-month project, but it takes, a half a day, well, that's a fraction of the size, right? And if you're simply okay with giving back to the project, meaning you were cutting into your profits, right? You're giving back to the betterment of this project. Then just do it, right? Explain what is being pushed aside though, right? While you fulfill this request for the client, and then get that go ahead from them. Then you want to make a note on an invoice, or which I call a zero line item, right? Or someplace in the documentation of this project that this additional scope of work was done, even if you're not charging for it. Now, if this request is on the other side of the spectrum and does affect the deadline, the cost, and needs further exploration, explain why that is to your client. Have a discussion around these reasons. See if the benefits of this request still fit in line with the original goals. Then adjust the project accordingly, right? More than likely, this request will not be implemented due to all of your above reasons. But it does give you an opportunity to present a phase 2 or 3 of the project after this initial scope of work is completed. Again, take note of it, then revisit it as the timeline and the relationship with the client progresses. Scope creep sounds like a very scary term, and it could be when not handled right. Pleasing clients is the name of the client services game. Be flexible with your clients. Allow for some scope creep items in every single project that you do. They will happen. But don't think that you need to do every single request that comes through. By handling it in a thoughtful and very professional way, you will be seen as the expert and that your experience has taught you well. The client will also know that you understand that you are looking out for them and the goals of the project at hand. Ultimately, you're earning their respect because you maintain focus and want the project to be as successful as it possibly can be. So, until next time, it's your time to live in the feast.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.